Before we begin, if you enjoy epic sci-fi stories where humanity proves it's far deadlier than anyone expects, hit the like button, subscribe for more HFY narratives, and let me know in the comments what you'd do if the galaxy's most feared predator was standing right in front of you. The bounty appeared on every network at the same time, translated instantly into 9,000 known languages, its numbers pulsing like a heartbeat. 300 million credits, transferable, unrestricted, with additional territory rights for whoever delivered proof of termination. No capture clause. No investigation request. Just a single line beneath the figure that made entire civilizations stiffen in fear. Apex Biological Threat Designation, Varcanan. Most species didn't need the designation. The name alone carried centuries of terror. The Varcanan was blamed for the dissolution of trade empires, the sterilization of frontier worlds, the mysterious disappearance of entire fleets that had gone silent without sending so much as a distress ping. It didn't conquer. It didn't negotiate. It arrived, and afterward, only debris remained. The Galactic Council chamber filled beyond legal capacity as delegates crowded into their tiers, some emitting fear sense they couldn't suppress, others clenching mandibles or talons in open agitation. Hololiths replayed frozen images of ruins, cracked moons, and the distorted shadow of something vast moving through starlight. The threat has outlived every containment attempt, declared the council speaker, her voice amplified to drown out the murmurs. All previous extermination efforts failed. This time we make it profitable. Across the chamber, mercenary liaisons leaned forward, their expressions sharpening. Kill-for-hire guilds began dispatching couriers before the session even ended. Warships changed course mid-transit. For the galaxy's hunters, this was not a moral issue. It was the largest payout in recorded history. On a completely different frequency, far from the council's grandeur, a human ship drifted on minimal thrust near the edge of a red dwarf's gravitational field. Its hull bore old scorch marks and mismatched repair plating, evidence of a vessel that had survived more luck than maintenance. The registry listed it as a long-range reconnaissance craft, but in truth it was little more than an interstellar scrapyard with engines. Elias Ward floated in the cockpit, boots hooked beneath a restraint bar, one hand wrapped around a cracked mug of reconstituted coffee. He listened to the council broadcast with half an ear while the rest of his attention stayed on the flickering sensor display. He had heard of the Varcanan before, of course. Everyone had. Tales of monsters were a cultural constant across species. 300 million credits, Elias muttered. Someone always decides to throw money at a problem instead of understanding it. His ship's AI chimed, neutral as ever. Statistical analysis suggests monetary incentives increase participation rates among private combat entities by 87%. Yeah, Elias said, uncurling himself and floating closer to the console. And 87% of those entities die horribly. The AI offered no response. It never did when he spoke like that. Unlike the council's favored operatives, Elias was not a soldier. He had flown support missions during border conflicts, salvaged wrecks on dead routes, and spent most of his adult life scanning places nobody wanted to claim. Humans were still new enough to the galactic stage that they were rarely trusted with power and frequently handed cleanup duty instead. Elias didn't mind. Empty space was quieter. What made his skin prickle now wasn't the bounty, but the coordinates attached to the threat bulletin. They overlapped his current survey grid by less than 2 light years. That's uncomfortably close, he said, brow furrowing. Recommend course alteration, the AI replied. Probability of hostile encounter has increased by. The ship bucked violently, alarms screaming as inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. Elias was thrown hard against the harness, the mug spinning away to burst against the cabin wall in a spray of dark foam. The lights dimmed, then surged back. What was that? Elias demanded, fingers flying across the console. No known weapon signature detected, the AI answered. Structural damage to propulsion array. Cause unknown. The sensor feed stuttered, then resolved into a single, overwhelming mass just ahead of them, outlined in distorted gravimetric readings. It wasn't moving toward the ship. It was simply there, like a mountain that had decided to occupy space. Elias felt his mouth go dry. That's not a moon, he whispered. The shape eclipsed nearby stars, its surface jagged and asymmetrical, scarred by burns that glowed faintly as if the wound heat had never truly dissipated. Power readings spiked and fell erratically, like the labored breathing of something alive. The Varcanan. Every training instinct screamed at him to flee, to dump power into the remaining engine and beg the drive to respond. Instead, Elias sat frozen, staring at the sensor data that contradicted everything he'd ever heard. This wasn't a creature in the midst of a rampage. It wasn't hunting. It was damaged. His communications panel crackled as automated distress pings spilled out, broadcasting his position to any listening ship within range. He slapped the override, killing the signal, heart pounding. "No," he said aloud, as much to himself as to the empty cockpit. "Not today." The galaxy had decided this thing was a monster worth killing for profit. Elias had spent too many years watching what happened after those decisions played out. He didn't know what the Varcanan truly was, only that it was alone, wounded, and closer than any human had ever survived being. The sensors flared again, and this time something shifted on the display, not toward him, but away, a slow, deliberate rotation that felt strangely hesitant. Elias swallowed and keyed the internal log, his voice steadier than he felt. "Personal note," he said. "First contact situations aren't always announced with a handshake. Sometimes they start with silence." Outside the hull, the most feared predator in the galaxy drifted in the dark, and for the first time in memory, it did not attack. It watched. Elias remained strapped in his seat long after the proximity alarms fell silent, his breathing shallow, his eyes fixed on the sensor silhouette that refused to fade. The Varcanan's energy signature fluctuated in erratic surges, not the aggressive spike of an attack pattern but the uneven collapse of a system failing piece by piece. Space around it glittered with fragments of ancient alloy and shattered containment rings, debris too old to belong to any modern engagement. "Run a passive scan only," Elias murmured. "No targeting. No active pings." The AI complied, feeding him a stream of fragmented data. Density readings off the scale. Biomechanical structures interwoven with starship-grade materials. Internal power generation present but critically unstable. This close, the thing should have reached through the hull and crushed him without effort. Yet the distance between them held, unbroken, like an unspoken truce. Elias unstrapped himself slowly, every movement deliberate. He sealed the cockpit behind him and armed his vac suit with a minimal survival kit. There were tools clipped to his belt, a cutter, diagnostic probes, a canister of emergency medgel used for humans and, in theory, nothing else. He did not take a weapon. The irony of bringing one felt grotesque. "You are exposing yourself to an entity classified as a galactic extinction-level threat," the AI said. "I know," Elias replied, locking the airlock hatch. "But it doesn't look like it's here to finish the job." The transition into vacuum stole his breath for a moment, the universe falling utterly silent. The Varcanan filled his visor as he drifted closer on controlled bursts, its scale impossible to reconcile. Plates of hardened tissue and fused alloy overlapped like tectonic shifts frozen mid-collapse. Deep gashes scored its body, some cauterized by energy fire, others still seeping luminous fluid that crystallized as it escaped into space. Elias felt very small. Something moved beneath the outer layers, slow and uneven. The predator was alive, but barely. One massive limb was suspended in a web of metallic restraints, ancient in design, their surfaces etched with sigils he didn't recognize. The traps weren't recent. They had been gnawing into flesh for a long time. "Someone caught you once," Elias said quietly, despite knowing there was no shared language. "Or tried to." As if in response, the Varcanan shuddered. The movement sent a low-frequency vibration through space itself, a pressure Elias felt in his bones instead of his ears. Warning lights flared in his display, but the creature still did not reach for him. Its eyes opened. They were vast, multifaceted structures set deep within ridged sockets, reflecting starlight in fractured hues. They focused on him with alarming clarity, pinning him in place. Elias's heart hammered as survival instinct surged, telling him this was the moment where myths became reality. Instead, the gaze faltered. The eyes dimmed, lids sliding shut again as the creature's massive respiration cycle stuttered. The Varcanan was not assessing prey. It was fighting to remain conscious. Elias forced himself closer, inch by inch, until he reached the nearest restraint. Up close, he could see how the metal had bonded with living tissue, the trap's design intended not to hold fast, but to slowly weaken whatever it caught. Cruel and effective. The kind of thing built by beings afraid of what they had ensnared. He extended the cutter with shaking hands and set it to its lowest output. The first contact between tool and restraint sent a tremor racing through the Varcanan's body. Elias froze, holding his position, waiting for retaliation that never came. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said, voice thick. "You don't have to believe me. Just, let me try." The restraint gave way with a reluctant snap, the severed end spiraling off into the dark. Luminous fluid surged from the wound, the Varcanan convulsing as centuries of agony finally found release. Elias nearly lost his grip, stabilizers flaring as he fought to stay upright. Then it stilled. The limb drifted free, massive and scarred, no longer twisted by the pull of the trap. The predator's breathing deepened, the erratic spikes smoothing into something closer to rhythm. Elias exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Working quickly before fear stole his courage, he applied medgel to the exposed tissue. The compound reacted immediately, forming a translucent seal over the wound. It was not designed for a being like this, but it slowed the bleed, dulling the damage. A stopgap, nothing more. The eyes opened again, slower this time. One vast pupil tracked his movements, not with hunger, but with something that made Elias's throat tighten. Confusion. Perhaps even disbelief. He floated back a meter, deliberately exposing his unarmed hands. "That's all I've got," he said. "I don't know who did this to you. I don't know what you've done. I just know you shouldn't die like this." The Varcanan emitted a low, resonant sound, felt more than heard, a vibration so deep it rattled the tools at Elias's belt. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a threat. It was a question. Elias watched as the creature turned slightly away from him, its massive form curling inward, shielding the newly freed limb instead of striking back. For the first time since he'd entered its presence, the oppressive weight in his chest eased. His suit telemetry spiked as a faint signal crossed his sensors, a distant cluster of drive signatures slipping into the system at high speed. The mercenaries had picked up his earlier distress call, or worse, the bounty broadcast was already drawing them in. Elias looked from the incoming contacts to the wounded giant before him. "We don't have much time," he said softly. The predator did not answer, but it did not flee either. It remained where it was, wounded and exposed, allowing a fragile thing made of bone and doubt to hover in its shadow. And for Elias Ward, that choice changed everything. The first mercenary ship tore into real space with the violence of a blade drawn too fast, its arrival sending shockwaves that rippled across Elias's sensors. 3 more followed in rapid succession, their hulls angular and overarmed, the kind of vessels designed to end fights before questions formed. Transponder codes flashed briefly before being masked, guild signatures stripped down to obscurity. They wanted the kill recognized but the methods forgotten. Elias backed toward his ship, keeping himself between the Varcanan and the growing ring of hostile lights. His mind raced through impossible options, none of them offering survival. The predators of the galaxy did not negotiate, and mercenaries were worse. They saw only the number attached to a corpse. A transmission cut through the silence, amplified beyond courtesy. Unidentified human vessel, a distorted voice intoned, thick with synthetic modulation. "You are obstructing a contracted extermination. Vacate the target zone immediately." Elias opened a channel, forcing calm into his voice. "This entity is critically injured. You don't know what you're firing at." A harsh laugh followed. "We know exactly what it is. And what it's worth." The lead ship's weapons arrays began to cycle, energy building in patterns Elias recognized from old conflict footage. Ion nets, gravitic anchors, containment torpedoes. Not a mercy kill. They intended to immobilize, extract proof, and leave whatever remained to bleed out in vacuum. The Varcanan stirred, its newly freed limb tensing as the trap signal spiked again. Fear rolled off it in a way no sensor could measure, but Elias could feel all the same, a vast presence recoiling from pain remembered too well. "Don't," Elias said, not sure who he was pleading with. "You don't have to do this." The mercenaries fired. The first net never reached its target. Space warped violently as the Varcanan moved, not in a rush but in a single decisive shift that folded light around its body. The net collapsed inward, crushed by a sudden distortion in gravity so severe Elias's ship screamed warnings. The second volley detonated against the Predator's outer plating, shedding sparks and shards, but failing to pierce what centuries of warfare had failed to break. Then the Varcanan truly reacted. It did not charge the mercenaries. It rotated, interposing its bulk directly between Elias and the barrage of incoming fire. Energy washed over its scarred surface, carving molten lines and forcing a sound from deep within that made the stars seem to tremble. Elias stared, paralyzed, as understanding crashed into him. The creature was protecting him. "No," he breathed. "You don't need to." A kinetic strike slammed into the Predator's flank, ripping analyzers' readings into chaos. The Varcanan answered at last, unleashing a pulse of compressed spacetime that tore through the nearest mercenary vessel. Armor crumpled like foil, and the ship folded in on itself before vanishing in a flash of distorted light. The wreckage never even had time to scatter. The remaining mercenaries hesitated, just long enough for fear to fracture their aggression. "This is Guild Theta 7, one voice barked over open channels. "Target is exhibiting adaptive defensive behavior." "Repeat, adaptive." The transmission cut off as the Varcanan lashed out again, its attack precise despite its injuries. A second ship lost propulsion, spinning wildly as internal systems collapsed. The bounty hunters broke formation, discipline giving way to survival instinct. Elias forced himself back into motion. He tore for his ship, boosting hard and sealing the airlock behind him. The cockpit snapped to life around him as he slammed into the pilot's seat, yanking controls with shaking hands. "We have to get out of here," he said even as he knew the engines might not respond. "Divert all remaining power to jump calculations." "Insufficient capacity," the AI replied. "Risk of core breach." A final mercenary ship fired a containment lance, its beam locking onto the Varcanan's damaged restraint sight. The Predator convulsed, the old wound flaring with fresh agony as the weapon tried to reassert control. Elias made a decision that felt less like courage and more like refusal. He opened a wideband channel, routing it through every relay his ship could reach. "This is Elias Ward of the Terran exploratory vessel Far Horizon," he said, his voice ringing through space. "The Varcanan is not attacking indiscriminately. It is defending itself. You're not stopping a monster. You're executing a wounded survivor." The mercenary ship retarget, its sensors locking onto his fragile hull. The pilot's reply was cold. "You are now classified as an interfering asset. Withdraw or be neutralized." The Varcanan sensed the shift instantly. Despite the lance burning into its flesh, it turned again, placing itself directly in the line of fire between Elias's ship and the mercenary vessel. The containment beam snapped as the Predator released a roar that finally matched its legend, not of rage but of defiance. One more spacetime pulse surged outward. The last mercenary ship did not survive it. Silence descended, thick and absolute, broken only by the fading echoes of ruined drives. Elias sat frozen, his hands still on the controls, his heart hammering against his ribs. Outside, the galaxy's deadliest predator drifted, scarred and smoking, its vast form sagging as the last of its strength bled away. It rotated slowly, orienting itself toward Elias's ship one final time. The eyes opened, dim but focused. The message came not as words, but as an overwhelming sense, a recognition born not of intellect alone but of instinct older than stars. Protection given. Protection returned. Alarms screamed as Elias's sensors flared again, this time with signatures far greater than the mercenary ships. Council fleets. Too many to fight. Too many to hide from. Elias closed his eyes for a heartbeat. The galaxy had just learned the price of cruelty. Now it would learn the cost of witness. The Council fleet emerged in disciplined formation, their arrival measured and deliberate, nothing like the chaotic brutality of the mercenaries who had come before. Dozens of vessels slid into position, ancient designs beside modern dread carriers, their combined mass blotting out distant stars. Where the mercenaries had smelled blood, the Council smelled liability. Elias watched their sensor locks settle over him and the wounded giant beyond his hull. His ship felt impossibly small under the attention of so much firepower, a fragile thought trapped beneath an ocean. His hands trembled, not from fear of death, but from the certainty that this moment would decide what the galaxy remembered about humanity. A priority channel opened without preamble. The same Council speaker from the broadcast appeared on his main display, her expression carved from cold restraint. "Human pilot," she said. "You have interfered with a sanctioned extermination. You will disengage immediately and power down." Elias swallowed. "You know it's wounded," he replied. "You know your fleets drove it here and broke it. Ending it now isn't security. It's convenience." A flicker passed across several faces in the background tears. The speaker's tone hardened. "Your species lacks jurisdiction. Step aside." Behind Elias's ship, the Varcanan shifted, its immense form curling subtly inward as fresh pain rippled through damaged systems. Even without sensors, Elias could feel its exhaustion, the weight of centuries pressing down on something that had finally stopped fighting long enough to be caught. Elias cut his engines. The sudden silence inside the cockpit felt louder than any alarm. Gasps echoed across the open channels as Council tacticians recalculated, confused by a human refusing the most basic survival instinct. "I'm not stepping aside," Elias said. "If you fire through me." The speaker leaned forward. "This creature has annihilated civilizations. By associating yourself with it, you accept the same classification. Elias met her gaze. Then explain why it shielded me when your hunters opened fire. Explain why the only time it attacked was to stop them. A pause followed, stretched thin as light years. Data feeds flickered across the Council's interfaces, replays of the Mercenary battle flooding their systems from dozens of angles. Analysts began muttering, their confidence eroding under raw evidence. The Varcanan initiated defensive maneuvers only after sustained provocation, one voice said quietly. Another followed. Patterns suggest protective behavior directed solely at the human. The speaker's mandibles tightened. Correlation does not imply innocence. No, Elias agreed. But it implies something was done to it first. A secondary channel opened unrequested, routed through civilian relays Elias didn't recognize. Human diagnostics ships dropped from concealment at the system's fringe, their sleek hulls broadcasting medical and humanitarian identifiers. They carried no visible weapons, only banks of scanning arrays and containment foam dispensers. Elias felt his throat tighten. Earth had heard him. This is Terran Aid Command, a calm voice announced. We are entering the engagement zone under humanitarian statute. Any hostile action against our vessels will be recorded and distributed. The Council reacted instantly, arguments erupting across the chamber. Several delegates recoiled, their frills or crests betraying discomfort. The calculus had shifted. Extermination in the dark was one thing. Doing it under 1,000 open feeds was another. The Varcanan sensed the change. Its massive head lifted fractionally as the first Terran ships approached, their energy signatures muted, non-threatening. Medical beams washed over its wounds, mapping damage, stabilizing failing systems. It tensed at first, then stilled as Elias's small vessel remained between it and the newcomers. It allows proximity, one analyst breathed. Selective trust behavior confirmed. A murmur rippled through the Council chamber. Monsters did not do that. Weapons did not decide who deserved to live. Elias felt a pressure behind his eyes as a new signal touched his ship's interface, not a transmission, but an impression carried on frequencies his instruments struggled to define. Images flashed through his mind: darkness, pursuit, traps tightening endlessly, the quiet extinction of others like it. Then the sensation shifted, centering on him, warm and steady. Recognition. It understands, Elias whispered. The speaker's composure cracked. This is impossible. No, Elias said. It's inconvenient. Silence followed, long and uncomfortable. The Council fleets held their positions, weapons hot but unfired. The bounty authorization blinked once on the shared network, then vanished, quietly withdrawn. Elias exhaled, his body sagging against the harness as tension drained from his limbs. Outside, the Varcanan lowered itself, vast coils settling into a defensive crescent around his ship and the Terran aid vessels. Its breathing steadied, each immense cycle less urgent than the last. For the first time since the legends began, the galaxy saw the Predator not as an unstoppable force, but as something capable of choosing not to strike. And as the feeds spread and the watching billions leaned closer to their screens, Elias realized the truth that no Council vote could erase. The galaxy had not spared the Varcanan out of mercy. It had hesitated out of fear of what humanity was willing to stand beside. The Varcanan's presence became a constant on the sensor grids, an undeniable proof that the galaxy's most feared predator had not only survived, but chosen a companion in Elias Ward. Reports flooded from systems across light years. Civilizations that once prepared fleets now whispered of humans as unpredictable, unstoppable, and something the Council itself had underestimated. Elias watched the Varcanan drift alongside the far horizon as they navigated a nebula corridor. Its massive form reflected in the ship's external cameras, half-shrouded in gas clouds, yet unmistakably alive, each movement precise, deliberate. Elias felt an odd calm watching it, a connection that had grown stronger than anything he had known in human life. It wasn't loyalty, it was recognition, a bond forged in unspoken understanding. "Are you certain about this?" the AI asked, its voice unusually hesitant. "Remaining here exposes us to inspection, possibly hostile intervention." Elias shook his head. "They'll see. Let them see." His gaze lingered on the Predator. The galaxy thinks power is measured by weapons. Sometimes it's measured by who you protect, and who trusts you in return. The Predator shifted, brushing a limb along the hull without damaging it, almost deliberately. Elias couldn't suppress a grin. It was neither pet nor tool, it was a being who had made a choice as freely as he had. He had offered kindness when the galaxy demanded annihilation, and the Varcanan had reciprocated in a language older than empires. Council communications flickered constantly, requests for surrender, threats of containment, and ultimatums ignored. Each message was a reminder that Elias and his companion were a single anomaly in a universe structured by fear. He welcomed it. Fear had governed interstellar politics for centuries, and yet here they were, a human and a predator rewriting the rules simply by existing. The first challenge came not from fleets, but from mercenaries still unwilling to accept the impossible. A strike squad attempted to flank them at the edge of a dying star system, believing stealth could outmaneuver an entity they had never understood. Elias monitored their approach, noting the precision of their vectors and the calculated arrogance that came with assumed superiority. The Varcanan sensed them first, its eyes flicking toward the threat as if it could see through the void itself. The predator moved, not with the sudden aggression of legends, but with the careful, fluid grace of something centuries old. Energy flares licked its limbs, creating a barrier of concentrated force. When the mercenary ships realized their targeting systems were failing, panic set in faster than combat protocols could engage. One by one their engines were shredded, subspace drives collapsing in bursts that lit the surrounding space in pale fire. Elias barely had time to process the spectacle before the predator returned to his side, settling into a protective position once more. He realized then that the Varcanan's strength was not raw destruction alone, but judgment. It struck only when necessary, choosing its moments with care unlike any weapon designed by the Council or built by mercenaries. Later, as they navigated toward a secluded system suitable for recovery, Elias reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He had entered this sector expecting danger, but he had not expected connection. The Varcanan was more than a weapon, more than a legend. It was a sentient being who had suffered under the galaxy's cruelty. And through a mixture of courage, empathy, and refusal to conform to fear, Elias had changed its path, and perhaps his own. The far horizon dropped out of hyperspace near the new system, the nebulous gases casting shimmering colors over the hull. Elias initiated docking sequences while the Varcanan hovered, massive and silent, its presence alone enough to deter any stray threats. He considered the irony. The galaxy that once offered millions for a kill now looked on helplessly as a predator they had feared implicitly accepted the protection of one human. On board, Elias checked the predator's condition. Every wound stabilized, yet the creature remained alert, its eyes occasionally locking on his in ways that spoke volumes without sound. He reached out, tentatively resting a hand against the metallic ridges of its forelimb. The Varcanan did not recoil. Instead, it lowered its massive head, a gesture that might have been affection if humans could ever read alien emotions so plainly. "I think we're going to be all right," Elias whispered. The Varcanan's low-frequency hum resonated in response, a sound he had come to understand as agreement. Outside, the first transmission from the Council arrived, clipped and formal. "Human pilot Ward, you are in violation of interstellar law. You are ordered to surrender the entity immediately." Elias muted the channel. There was no longer any power in threats that relied on assumptions of fear. He activated the broadcast to the galaxy at large, showing live feeds of the predator, calm and non-aggressive, resting beside his ship. The contrast between the Varcanan's reputation and reality spread like wildfire, igniting speculation, wonder, and awe. Humanity had not dominated. Humanity had chosen differently, and the universe was taking note. Then, from the edges of the nebula, a signal pulsed. It carried not threats, but communication, recognition from species that had long assumed the predator's extinction. Their messages were fragmented, hesitant, yet unmistakably respectful. It was the first step toward rebuilding trust between species and reclaiming knowledge lost to fear and destruction. Elias understood what the moment meant. The galaxy would remember not the bounty that failed, not the fleets that could not win, but a single human who chose empathy over advantage, who offered aid when annihilation was expected, who refused to let fear dictate his actions. The predator, a being feared across light years, had rested its head not on the chest of a warrior or the cold steel of a weapon, but beside a human. The predator lowered itself fully into the nebula's glow, massive coils folding in a protective posture around the far horizon. Elias floated alongside the viewport, watching as centuries of myth and terror settled into quiet trust. The galaxy had not seen this coming, and perhaps it never would again. As the stars shimmered and distant systems began to respond to their broadcast, Elias whispered one final thought, not to the Council, not to the mercenaries, but to the creature who had chosen him as its companion. "Let them watch," he said. "The most feared predator in the galaxy doesn't sleep in fear. It sleeps where it trusts. And right now that's here." The Varcanan exhaled a low, resonant vibration, a sound that carried neither threat nor challenge, only the unspoken promise of coexistence. Elias smiled, letting the tension drain from his body, knowing that for once, the galaxy had learned something it could not unsee. Their story was no longer legend. It was reality, and it would endure.